Welcome back to another episode of TDNY. This day, not year. The podcast that looks back at the history of the week ahead. I'm your host, Adam, and I have another 7 days worth of stories for you. Plus another 7 song pairings to broaden your musical horizons. As a little teaser, on this episode, we'll learn how the first modern game of ice hockey ended, just how popular the Beatles were, if you're really an old soul when it comes to music, and when real life is more mysterious than the mystery genre. Plus a whole lot more along the way. So sit back, relax, and let's start off with Monday, March 3rd. On this day, not year, a sport was born. I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that Australia, in general, loves sport. However, when it comes to one internationally played game, we tend to favour the field variety over ice. It may even surprise many in Australia to know we have an ice hockey league, the AIHL, Australian Ice Hockey League, which started in the year 2000. Although perhaps most famous in Canada and the United States of America today, ice hockey as a game can trace its roots back to Europe. Maybe. Kind of. It's difficult to really track the origins of such a sport, as the concept of hitting a ball with a stick is so simplistic that it has kind of appeared in many different countries and by many different peoples. Just to name a few, Ireland has hurling, in Scotland it was shinty, Persia with polo, and England had bandy, while carvings from ancient Greece even show a stick and ball game there too. For a while, it was thought that ice hockey may have been introduced into Canada in the 1800s by stationed British soldiers. If you can remember all the way back to our first episode, and the January 15th, 1867 disaster of the Regent's Park skating tragedy, you may recall that many on that day, before they were dunked, were playing ice hockey. The frost fairs mentioned in that episode, events held during the years that the English River Thames froze over, also often depicted ice hockey-like games being played on the frozen surface. Recent findings have discovered a Nova Scotian game played by native inhabitants of the area in Canada that resembles ice hockey, and predates the British introduction, although this game was played with a square puck. So it's likely a mix of all of the above sports, taking influence from immigrants across the world arriving in Canada that led to the creation of the sport we know today. But the first modern game can be traced back to today, March 3rd, in 1875, when the first indoor game of ice hockey was played on Montreal's Victoria skating rink. It was the first time a flat, circular puck was used, and the goals were 8 feet, or 2.4 metres wide, 2 feet wider than the modern goals. The game was played by 2 teams of 9, made up of students from the nearby McGill University. Prior to the game, it was advertised in the Canadian newspaper, the Montreal Gazette. Victoria Rink. A game of hockey will be played at the Victoria Skating Rink, this evening, between 2 nines chosen from among the members. Good fun may be expected, as some of the players are reputed to be exceedingly expert at the game. Some fears have been expressed on the part of the intending spectators that accidents were likely to occur, through the ball flying about in too lively a manner, to the imminent dangers of lookers-on, but we understand that the game will be played with a flat circular piece of wood, thus preventing all danger of it leaving the surface of the ice. Subscribers will be admitted on the presentation of their tickets. So the game came and went. The Daily British Whig reporting, shins and heads were battered, benches smashed, and the lady spectators fled in confusion. Just why were people fleeing? Because Not only was this the first modern game of ice hockey, it also contained the first fight in a modern game of ice hockey. Although rather than a melee between the opposing teams, it was a third troop that kicked things off. A group of recreational ice skaters, watching and waiting on the sidelines, had had enough. The game was dragging on, the ice surface was being destroyed, and the skaters were fed up waiting for their turn on the ice. So the first modern game of ice hockey ended in a big fight. It's reported the fighting only stopped as a young bystander was caught up in the melee and took a stray blow to the head, bringing both sides back to their senses. My song pairing to end this story with is the classic by Dury and the Blockheads, Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick. It rather nicely sums up the way the first modern ice hockey game concluded. Hit me with your rhythm stick. Hit me slowly. Hit me quick. Hit me. Hit me. Hit me. Tuesday, March 4th. And on this day, not year, the Beatles were popular. But were they as popular as they claimed? Formed in 1960, consisting of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Pete Best, they were discovered playing at the Liverpool-based Cavern Club by Brian Epstein, who would later go on to become their manager. Of course, this was back before Ringo Starr joined the band, and Pete Best was still living his best life as the Beatles' drummer. The brash, swearing, drinking singers, under Epstein's direction, would change their style, attitude, and drummer. Over the next 6 years, the band would become superstars. Beatlemania, as it was coined, although the exact origins of the term are unknown. Concerts were packed full with screaming, fainting, and crying fans, and when they left, they would often leave behind damage to the venue. The Glasgow Concert Hall was left in such a sore state after a concert, over 100 seats damaged and plaster falling off the walls, that management deemed it wouldn't be let out to bands in the future. The Beatles themselves would, ironically, be swarmed by fans as they left concerts, fans chasing after them as they were being driven away. The UK couldn't get enough, nor could the rest of the world. In 1964, they appeared on the American Ed Sullivan Show, and 73 million people tuned in to watch the band. Their 1965 American tour saw them travel by armoured car, and sell out stadiums usually only reserved for sporting events. The 55,000 screaming fans at Shea Stadium was even enough to overwhelm security, forcing them to cover their ears as the Beatles entered, and the screaming reached a crescendo. The crowd would even drown out the actual performance the Beatles gave. Between the screaming, fainting and crying fans, the absurdity of being a music band that couldn't even be heard wasn't lost on the Beatles, with John Lennon deciding to play the keyboard with his elbows, if it was all lost on the audience anyway. Suffice to say, the Beatles were big. Then, in the lead-up to their 1966 world tour, they individually sat down with Maureen Cleave, of London's Evening Standard newspaper. Maureen had known the Beatles for years, so it is likely they all felt comfortable with speaking openly around her. Lennon even referred to his interview with her as just speaking with a friend. Perhaps it was this casual attitude that caused him to say the words that would nearly be their downfall as a band. In her interview with John Lennon, published on this day back in 1966, he was quoted as saying, "Christianity will go. It will vanish and shrink. I needn't argue about that. I'm right, and I'll be proved right. We're more popular than Jesus now. I don't know what will go first, rock and roll or Christianity. Jesus was all right, but his disciples were thick and ordinary. It's them twisting it that ruins it for me." For 4 months the interview sat smouldering, a powder keg waiting to go off. It didn't ignite much pushback in England, where Christianity had been on the wane for years, and such a statement wasn't so inflammatory. However, over in America, the quote was set to explode in Lennon's and the Beatles' faces. Late July 1966, less than a fortnight before the Beatles' US tour was to start, Art Unger, publisher and writer for Datebook magazine, a publication focused on music and information for teenagers, was working on the September issue. It was to feature the John Lennon quote from earlier that year, "I don't know what will go first, rock and roll or Christianity," front cover, alongside an enlarged shot of McCartney, plus another quote, this one from McCartney, calling America a lousy country. Unger sent off copies of the interviews to radio and talk shows around America, and almost immediately the anger started growing. Radio stations the nation over stopped playing records from the band. Some Carolina stations were proud to be ahead of the curve, considering the songs unacceptable to many lovers of good music, and had stopped them months ago. Senator Robert Fleming wanted to ban the band from Pennsylvania and have all agencies refuse to book them, while in Alabama, a radio station had borrowed a tree grinding machine, inviting the public to dispose of unwanted Beatles records and for them to be ground down to, and I quote, "a fine dust. A box full of this will be presented to the British pop stars when they arrive in Memphis, Tennessee, not far from here." The quote continued on, "We intend to do the grinding in one of Birmingham's public parks and expect hundreds of teenagers to be there." Records weren't just ground, they were burned, smashed, stomped on, any way to dispose of them and any other merchandise the incensed public had hoarded. Flying to America on an American airline, the Beatles found Bibles placed on their seats as they boarded. Their manager, Brian Epstein, offered any venue the chance to back out of a booking for their tour, yet not one decided to actually cancel on the band. Lennon tried to downplay the statement, eventually even apologizing, and saying in interviews, "I'm not saying that we're better or greater or comparing us with Jesus Christ as a person or God as a thing or whatever it is. I just said what I said and it was wrong." In another, stating, "I was using expressions on things that I've just read and derived about Christianity, only I was saying it in the simplest form I know." Although it was already decided for the Beatles to end touring after 1966, perhaps the controversy around their American tour would have sealed the deal regardless. During 1967, they focused on writing and producing, releasing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band that year, followed by The Beatles, also known as The White Album, the year after. These albums would lead to their own fractures within the band, but the controversy around being more popular than Jesus had faded away from public consciousness, appearing more as jokes in shows like The Simpsons or Angry Beavers. As for Lennon's comments on a decline in Christianity, well, as per the last 3 Australian censuses, Censi? Whatever. 1996 recorded 12.5 million Christians. 2016 saw a small drop to 12.2 million, while the 2021 census was a larger decrease, down to 11.1 million. And as for that rock and roll music, the Beatles, as per Spotify, still draw 32 million monthly listens. Now, choosing a song to pair with this particular story is a tough choice. Do I go the obvious and choose something by the Beatles? Come Together, perhaps? Or Carry That Weight, even? No. I think the perfect pairing comes from the 1973 rock opera Jesus Christ Superstar, with King Herod's song, a number showing Jesus won't be a song and dance man for the entertainment of others. A nice parallel, I think. I only ask things I'd ask any superstar. What is it that you have got that puts you where you are? Wednesday, March 5th. And on this day, not year, we go from music history to music history. In the 1930s, the Ugarit Royal Palace was excavated by French archaeologist Claude F.A. Schaeffer. Dating back to the 15th century BC, the palace that is, not Claude, and covering an area of 6,500 square metres, the palace, located in what is now northwestern Syria, was, at the time, a hub of modern civilization. Standing at least 2 stories tall, and with 90 rooms built around 8 separate courtyards, the palace contained internal gardens, pools of water fed by running water channels, and even internal piping, rooms and areas for diplomats, scribes, the throne room complete with adjoining archives and a bureaucratic courtyard. At the height of the Ugarit population, the palace ruled over a population of around 8,000 citizens, and was an important trade partner to Egypt, Syria, Cyprus, and many other areas. During the excavation by Claude, a series of cuneiform tablets were discovered. Cuneiform, as described by worldhistory.org, is a system of writing first developed by the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia, circa 3500 BCE. The tablets were written in Hurrian cuneiform, a variation used by the Hurrians, a people who lived near Ugarit in the Bronze Ages. Although many of the tablets found were broken or faded with age, one remained nearly perfect. After some study, it was found that the tablets contained Hurrian hymns, songs with lyrics and musical notes. Some even had the names of their composers still written on them. This was discovered by Dr. Anne Kilmer, who was researching the tablets in the 1970s, along with a music researcher. It was discovered that the near-perfect tablet contained a hymn to the goddess Nikkal, wife of the moon god, and she was associated with orchids, fruit, and fertility. Along with the hymn to Nikkal, what was essentially sheet music for a 9-stringed lyre were also contained on the tablet. The tablet made no mention of pitch or rhythm, but instead the cuneiform writings depict which string to play and hand placement. This makes the tablet the oldest complete work of music discovered. At the time, it pushed the creation of Western music back at least 1,400 years. Although the lyrics are debated, as some flaking had occurred, and the Hurrian language isn't one we fully understand, one translation has the lyrics as, "Once I have endeared the deity, she will love me in her heart. The offer I bring may wholly cover my sin. Bringing sesame oil may work on my behalf. In ore may I," translation missing, "the sterile may they make fertile. Grain may they bring forth. She, the wife, will bear children to the father. May she who had not yet borne children bear them." Very catchy. In 1974, on this day of March 5th, the song was performed to an audience for the first time in likely over 3,400 years. With 1,000 people sitting in attendance at the Californian Wheeler Hall Auditorium, the tablet song, now known as Hurrian Hymn to Nikkal, or Zaluzi Prayer to the Gods, or simply H6, was plucked out by Professor Richard Crocker. There's something almost magical in the knowledge that this song even still exists. The writer is dead, passing well before most of the countries and culture around today even existed, While the city of Ugarit is also gone, forgotten, it lives on in relics, visions of a past lived but not known. This song, written down for a god no longer worshipped, and preserved for all those centuries, can still be heard today, can still evoke feelings in the listener, and is, really, for that reason alone, no different from the music of today. An echo reaching out from over 3,400 years ago. I think the song pairing for this story is an obvious one. Although no recordings exist of the 1974 performance, later attempts to translate the tablet into music do exist and are available online. So, for this story, go and listen to Hurrian Hymn to Nikkal by Levy. Thursday, March 6th. On this day, not year, the key to a mystery author's mysterious disappearance was close at hand. Dame Agatha Christie, legendary mystery author of Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile, among many others, and creator of fictional detective Poirot, whose popularity is only rivaled by Sherlock Holmes. Born in 1890, she married Archibald Christie in 1914, and by 1921 had published her first book, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, and would go on to publish another 6, before she became the subject of her own mystery. Life wasn't going well for Agatha in 1926. Her mother's passing in April had deeply impacted her, and 4 months later, in August, her husband had asked for a divorce, stating he had fallen in love with another woman, Nancy Neal. With her world crumbling around her, on December 3rd, 1926, Agatha Christie drove away from her house in Sunningdale, Berkshire, England, and disappeared. Later, her car was found by a nearby quarry, and a body of water known as the Silent Pool. Fears she had drowned were assuaged when no body could be found, but that made her disappearance all the more mysterious. For 11 days the public searched. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle tried to make use of a medium to pinpoint her location. Thousands of volunteers and police combed the countryside while planes flew above looking down. Day after day the mystery deepened. Newspapers offered rewards. Her dog was brought out to try and track her scent. Police even speculated she was going around London disguised as a man. Her secretary denied claims the whole thing was a publicity stunt. Then, on December 14th, she was found at a spa, 184 miles or 296 kilometres from her house in Yorkshire. She had signed into the Swan Hydropathic Hotel as Tressa Neal, using the same surname as her husband's mistress. She claimed to have no recollection of the previous 11 days, and doctors backed up her statement, diagnosing her with genuine loss of memory. So Agatha settled back into life, divorced her husband, continued writing, married again, and would eventually write an autobiography, in which she never addressed, or mentioned again, her time missing. And so, with her death in 1976, maybe we would never get an answer as to where she went in those missing 11 days, and just why she had vanished. Well, that is until 1979, a psychic, Tamara Rand, claimed to have been told by Agatha Christie herself during a séance of a secret key, supposedly one that would unlock a box containing a hidden diary detailing her missing time. The key was hidden in Turkey, in a hotel Agatha Christie had once stayed at, the Pera Palace Hotel, buried beneath the floorboards of room 411, where Christie once stayed, where it was claimed she wrote Murder on the Orient Express. The psychic insisted the hidden key lay in that room. So, on this day, back in 1981, with the psychic on phone directing, a spot in the room was opened up, and from it, a key was lifted out. Was this finally going to be the end of the mystery? Would this key unlock the answers? Nope. Immediately after it was retrieved, the hotel owner, Hassan Cesar, grabbed the key and vanished into a gilded elevator. He would emerge to place a $2 million ransom on the key that no one was willing to pay, especially with the lockbox still missing. Reports from people present also mentioned the key was wrapped in what looked suspiciously like a fresh piece of modern, clean, man-made foam. Earlier that year, Warner Brothers had released a movie, Agatha, with the plot synopsis from IMDb. In December 1926, mystery writer Dame Agatha Christie's husband, Colonel Archie Christie, asks for a divorce. She leaves her car and goes missing for 11 days. US reporter Wally Stanton searches for her in this speculative story. An awfully big coincidence, a movie about her missing came out just a month prior. But it fails to be a coincidence when it was revealed that Warner Brothers were behind the original hiring of Tamara Rand in seeing if she could uncover anything on the disappearance. While nothing has ever been said either way, it certainly seemed to be a publicity stunt that took on a life of its own, and a hotel owner who was after a quick buck. The perfect pairing for this story comes from the Dukes of Stratosphear, releasing an album in 1984 that was a throwback to the psychedelic pop songs prevalent in the 1960s. The band was a mystery, coming from seemingly nowhere, and then it was announced they had been killed in a horrible sherbet accident. A real mystery. That is, until it was revealed the Dukes of Stratosphear were actually English rock band XTC, still alive and well. If the mystery behind this band wasn't already enough to pair them with this story, the song will seal the deal. Vanishing Girl by the Dukes of Stratosphear. Friday, March 7th. And on this day, not year, the happiest place on earth turns into a bloody nightmare. Disneyland first opened up in Anaheim, California, 1955. The first theme park opened by Disney, and the only one done so under the supervision of Walt himself. Legend goes he even invented the modern trash can for the park, pacing out the steps required to consume a hot dog after purchase, and wanting bins placed at the placed-out path, either for rubbish or regurgitation, who knows. The park, opening on July 17th, was even covered in a broadcast by future President Ronald Reagan, touring the park and detailing features for people at home. As a quick aside, doing research for this story, I also found that when Disneyland opened in 1955, it featured a bra store named Intimate Apparel, and run by the wonderful Wizard of Bras. Not only selling intimates, it also offered a history lesson on undergarments. Deemed too risque, the store lasted 6 months before it was shut down. But back to the story at hand. Disneyland opened with the slogan, "The happiest place on earth," and for many that was probably true. The wonderful and thrilling rides, the attractions for both old and young, the characters of page and screen brought to life all around them, and all strewn around a colourful and rubbish-free 60-acre park. And for most, Over the next 26 years, it would remain the happiest place on Earth. But for some, all that would change on the night of March 7th, 1981. The Rohr Company, that's R-O-H-R, manufacturer of rail cars, subway cars, buses, and the Aerotrain, had booked out large sections of the park for a private party of 10,000. Specifically, they had booked the 1967 rebuilt Tomorrowland area of Disneyland. 3 of the guests at the party were the 28-year-old James O'Driscoll, his 25-year-old date, Julie Hollander, and the 18-year-old Mel Yorba. Family would later recall that Mel Yorba had gone to the park to have a good time. And a good time he was having. Some reports state he was quite intoxicated, while others deny that claim. But what everyone can agree on is that a little before 10 p.m, as James and Julie walked by Mel, he reached out and pinched Julie on the bottom. What followed next was a short chase between the two men. Having been cornered, Mel punched James in the face, while James produced an 8.5-inch hunting knife and would twice introduce it into the young Mel Yorba's chest, piercing into his liver, diaphragm, and, fatally, his heart. James would spend the next 20 minutes in hiding, having thrown the knife into a moat surrounding Sleeping Beauty's castle, and ditching his blood-soaked shirts into one of Walt's beloved trash cans. He was eventually found cowering in some bushes, and, along with Julie, taken away by the police and held for bail at $250,000. Meanwhile, Mel Yorba lay on the ground bleeding out. An ordinary step, if such an extraordinary event were to occur anywhere else, would be to 1. Attend to the victim, while 2. An ambulance is called to the scene. Unfortunately for Mel, Disney enforced a strict rule that kept outside elements, such as police and ambulances, outside, to not shatter the fantasy of Disneyland. Instead, a park nurse and 2 security guards were called to attend to the dying man. An unmarked Disneyland van arrived, Yorba was loaded in along with the nurse and guards, and after rushing to a nearby hospital, 18-year-old Mel Yorba was pronounced dead. The first murder at Disneyland had just occurred. The aftermath of the events would see Mel's family sue the park for $60 million, stating that if an ambulance had been called and proper medical care given, his life may have been saved. Eventually the case was settled and the Yorbas awarded $600,000. Meanwhile, despite claiming the killing had been accidental, James O'Driscoll would be sentenced to 16 years in prison. As a pairing for this day's story, may I suggest a number by a cappella group Da Vinci's Notebook, with their tongue-in-cheek Magic Kingdom in the Sky, a faux religious examination of the worship surrounding Disneyland. Saturday, March 8th, and on this day, not year, the public were let loose on the skies. Did you know we've been pronouncing the word helicopter wrong our whole lives? Etymologically speaking, the word comes from 2 Greek words meaning spiral and wing, a fitting name for the device. Unfortunately, those words are helix, giving us helico, and pteron. So rather than helicopter, we should be splitting it as helicopter. There goes a plane. Perhaps the earliest helicopter, or at least the design of it, dates back to the 1480s, with a sketch drawn by Leonardo da Vinci, describing a vehicle called an aerial screw. This early helicopter featured a vertical spiral blade, rather than the flat bar of helicopters we are used to today. While theoretically it would have worked, there didn't exist material light enough to build it from, or anything powerful enough to rotate the screw. Although in 2022, a drone was constructed using the vertical screw blade, and it was able to maintain flight. Since Da Vinci, the helicopter has come a long way, with the technology really taking off in the early 1900s. From first flights hovering less than a meter above the ground, to finally building up new prototypes that were able to hover stably at a height of 50 meters. World War I saw the technology advance further and faster, and the years after the war, the air was full of newer and more powerful designs, flying higher, further, and for longer. Finally, we arrive at March 8th, 1946, when the latest and greatest in technology, the Bell 47, is certified for commercial and civilian use. That's right, the likes of you or me could be zipping around the skies, flying off to the shops, or dropping, quite literally, the kids off to school. World War I pilot and writer Jill Rob Wilson wrote enthusiastically about the future he envisioned with civilian helicopters. During the initial years, while helicopter is working through further development to approach somewhat the use of the automobile, it'll be tested on suburban mail routes, as an aerial taxicab, as a sower of grain, a rejuvenator of cranberry bogs, a Coast Guard rescue craft, a shore-to-ship ferry, a pilot boat, a prospector's and geologist's instrument, a police vehicle, and in numerous kindred utilities. In other words, the helicopter, short in range but long on adaptability, fits a greater variety of human requirements than anything in transportation since the automobile. Of course, today the skies aren't full of personal helicopters rushing to and fro, but that doesn't mean the impact of the Bell 47 wasn't felt. It was a Bell 47 that became the first news chopper, or telecopter, in 1958, a trend that took off, and was copied by news stations around the world, at least until the disastrous crashes and accidents started occurring, especially when competing stations meant multiple helicopters in the air. A Bell 47 was also one of the stars in 1967 Australian television show Skippy the Bush Kangaroo. Just because the helicopter itself had been certified for civilian use, it didn't mean just anyone could go out and start flying one. Much like with a car, a license is still required. And rather fortunately, these aren't as easy to get as fudging some numbers in a logbook. From a quick Google, it appears that if you are after a helicopter license in Australia, you may be looking at anywhere between $50,000 to $80,000. Back in 1946, in a real mishmash of transportation technology, the day the helicopter became certified for commercial and civilian use, Winston Churchill and Dwight Eisenhower, former British Prime Minister and future US President, were in a horse-drawn carriage that nearly crashed when flashbulbs from cameras startled the horses. For this story, and for obvious reasons if you've ever seen the movie Apocalypse Now, I can only suggest the pairing of Ride of the Valkyries by Richard Wagner. And finally, for Sunday, March 9th, and on this day not year, the actor was putting on a performance to the tune of $64,000. It was a quiet morning in Long Island, New York. An employee of the Manufacturers Trust Bank, Mr. James Weston, was just getting in for the day. It was still over an hour before the bank would open for the public, so he was in no real rush. But just as he had finished unlocking the front door, he felt a hand on the small of his back, and he was pushed inside. Following him in were 3 armed men. Mr. Weston soon found his ankle bound, and himself chained up in the lobby. 2 of the men vanished, reappearing with armfuls of chairs, which they lined up in a row within the basement. The 3rd man politely asked James Weston to greet the employees as they came in, and direct them to the chairs. This request was punctuated by the gun the man was carrying. Perhaps if Weston knew it wasn't even loaded, he may not have been so accommodating to the demands. So, as time dragged on, one by one, each of the 16 bank employees arrived at the bank, and were directed to take a seat. In a tense moment, for the hostages and bank robbers, the telephone started to ring. Indicating their knowledge of the bank, they picked out the right hostage to answer the phone, but not before warning her that 17 lives now hung in her hands. Another life would soon enter the building, as postman Nicholas Sedano arrived, but grew suspicious waiting outside. Asking what was going on, one of the gunmen remarked, "Never mind what's going on, bud, you're in it now." While Nicholas would later recount another of the gunmen more politely asking him, "Would you please join the rest of the party sitting over there?" The time hit 9 a.m., and the automatic locks sealing the bank vault disengaged. Again, showing their intimate knowledge of the bank, the gunmen picked out the 2 hostages able to open the vault, and the hostages able to open the teller banks, small lockboxes contained within. As each box was opened, the notes inside were placed within a blue silk bag. No burlap sack with $sign here. Finally, with all the notes stowed away, but the coins, totaling around $11,000, left behind. With 10 minutes before the bank was to open, the hostages were lined up in the basement, and told not to move for 10 minutes. Then, as quietly as they had come in, the bank robbers vanished, no one even seeing them leave. The bank, now $64,000 poorer. This had been the first bank robbery in New York for years, but the police quickly knew who was to blame. This was the work of Willie Sutton, also known as the Actor. Willie Sutton, born 1901, was a career criminal, in his life robbing over 100 banks and escaping from jail at least 3 times, with many more attempts made but thwarted. Sutton was a charming criminal, getting by on disguises and acting where he could, and relying on his unloaded pistol or Thompson submachine gun when that didn't work. When asked why he kept them unloaded, he replied, "Otherwise someone might get hurt." This 1950 robbery was to be one of the last he would attempt. In the years lying low after, he was eventually recognized in early 1952 as Willie Sutton by a passing clothing salesman named Arnold Schuster. Arnold attempted to alert 2 nearby officers to Sutton, but Willie Sutton, ever the actor, played off his identity, even producing a fake ID. This was enough to convince the police, but after later insistence from Schuster, a more thorough search was conducted, and no charm was getting Willie Sutton out of it this time. For his trouble in identifying and having helped arrested the FBI's 11th most wanted criminal, Arnold Schuster received no reward. However, he was now walking around with a target on his back. On March 8, 1952, Schuster was gunned down by John Mazziota. Some claim this was at the bequest of crime boss Albert Anastasia, while some others claim John was looking to rob Willie Sutton himself, an act now made impossible by Schuster's meddling. In either case, the retaliatory killing wasn't good for Willie Sutton, as, on top of his prior crimes, plus unserved jail time after escaping, A trial in 1952 saw him charged with a maximum sentence of 120 years in prison. He didn't end up serving his full time. In 1969, at 68 years old, Willie Sutton was released. He would go on to consult with banks to increase their security, and even starred in a credit card ad, boasting of the security features of the new Face card. Willie Sutton would eventually pass away at age 79 in 1980. Over his career as a bank robber, he stole an estimated $2 million. If we inflate that from his last robbery in the early 1950s, it would be the equivalent of a little over $26.3 million today. While many songs do pair nicely with this story, Take the Money and Run, Band on the Run, Money for Nothing, as a few examples, none fit better, to my knowledge, than the Clash's 1980 song Bankrobber, with the lyrics, "My daddy was a bank robber, but he never hurt nobody. He just loved to live that way, and he loved to steal your money," which is the perfect description of Willie Sutton, a song released the same year he passed away. Right, that's it. We've made it to the end of another week and another episode of TDNY. Only, how much can you remember? Don't worry, here's a handy quiz for you to test yourself. Question 1. When did the AIHL, the Australian Ice Hockey League, start? Question 2. What were the Beatles greeted with as they boarded their flight to America? Question 3. How old is the song in our story from Wednesday? Question 4. Which other famous mystery writer attempted to use a medium to locate the missing Agatha Christie? Question 5. Which future president was present opening day at Disneyland? Question 6. How should we really be pronouncing helicopter? And question 7. How much money did Willie Sutton steal over his career? And answers. The answer to question 1, the AIHL started in the year 2000, and it's still going to this day, for anyone looking for something new to watch. The answer to question 2, the Beatles were greeted by Bibles. Question 3, the answer is 3,400 years old. The answer to question 4, which other famous mystery writer was attempting to use a medium to locate the missing Agatha Christie, was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Question 5, Ronald Reagan was the future president present at the opening day of Disneyland. Question 6, helicopter, we should be pronouncing helicopter. Helicopter. And question 7, how much money did Willie Sutton steal over the years? I'll accept either $2 million or $26 million. So, how did you do? 7 out of 7? And with that, we truly come to the end of another episode. I hope you've learned a thing or two along the way, but more importantly, also had fun. thisdaynotyear@gmail.com for any feedback, corrections, or just because you want to write. I'll be back next week where we'll be looking at the history of the 10th to the 16th of March. Until then.